Welcome back. I'm Iris Tao. President Trump denies any plans for strikes inside Venezuela, while the U.S. military forces continue to build up near the region. Joining me now to discuss is Rick de la Torre. He's a former CIA station chief in Caracas, Venezuela. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. So first, I want to start with a bit of intrigue here about Maria Corina Machado, the opposition leader against regime leader Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela. She was, of course, we know, the Nobel Peace Prize winner this year, who also recognized President Trump in her acceptance of the award. So we're seeing some speculation now that she could be protected in the U.S. embassy. Do you think that's possible?
I don't know. I don't have any special insights into that in particular. I do know that she has been in hiding ever since her party won that election, and the Maduro regime has tried to keep power and has exercised very violence to members of that party with political arrests, detentions, outlawing them. A great number of those individuals that stood for freedom during that election had to flee the country. So my understanding is that she is in hiding within Venezuela. She's taking on that leadership position to hopefully see a free and democratic Venezuela shortly.
So we have seen a lot of military buildup recently around that region. Of course, a lot of strikes recently too announced by the administration against alleged drug boats in the region. Do you see that as the actual end goal of striking drug boats and countering drug trafficking? Do you see that as the actual end goal of those actions, or is there something bigger into it that we might need to know here?
Well, I think what we're seeing is really an escalation of pressure against the Maduro regime. At this stage, really, with every day, every week that goes on, the military forces that are currently there, located adjacent to Venezuela in the water, have the capability to completely decapitate that military, the Venezuelan military, take out all their surface-to-air missiles, take out their radar installations. So they can do that, and Maduro knows that too, right? In fact, it was leaked today that he was reaching out to Putin in Moscow, seeking assistance and help with missile systems and with additional military supplies, in some sort of attempt, I guess, to push back on the U.S. presence. As this escalation continues and as that pressure continues, the regime is really cornered and left with very, very few options. That is possibly, Maduro, giving himself up to authorities, and where he is indicted here in the United States. He is the leader of a narco state and an active leader within Agua and other narco and units within Venezuela, where they do profit from the drug trade. So that's one option. Another option is perhaps someone within his inner circle decides to facilitate an arrest or turn him over to American authorities or the international court maybe, or perhaps maybe a third country leader might step in and give him an exit strategy. If all that fails, the continued military presence may reach a level of kinetic military action within Venezuela.
Military action around Venezuela, that's certainly something that everyone is looking out for now as tensions rise. Meanwhile, the Maduro regime, we know that is financing socialism and communism in the whole Latin America region. Here's Senator Rick Scott discussing Cuba. Let's take a look.
What do you think removing Maduro would signal to other socialist regimes in the area?
It'll be the end of Cuba. America is going to take care of the Southern Hemisphere. And we're going to make sure that there's freedom and democracy.
Talk to us more about why Venezuela is significant to the U.S., both geopolitically and also militarily, or when it pertains to other aspects as well.
Sure. So, Venezuela over the last few years has basically served as a launching point for our adversaries here in the Western Hemisphere. It is a puppet state of the Cuban government. The Cuban government is the one that has protected the Maduro regime and has provided them with the knowledge and technology to keep the repressive actions that they do, in Venezuela, and really keep any democracy movements from actually taking hold. In this last election, that was all undone, but the Cuban government and the Venezuelan regime aren't going to let go that easily. Partners like Beijing and Moscow and Tehran have made significant investments within Venezuela, profiting from off the backs of the Venezuelan people. And that's something that these interests want to try to keep as long as possible. But that time seems like it's coming to an end. And if Venezuela, just like Senator Scott correctly pointed out, if there is a significant regime change in Venezuela, that could signal also the end of the Cuban regime shortly after.
So you just mentioned Beijing's role in all of this. Of course, we know that there's a lot of allegations and evidence suggesting that China is, in a way, propping up Venezuela by buying its oil, sometimes through a transshipment from countries like, for example, Malaysia. We also know that China is actually a big sponsor, if not a big maker, of the surveillance technologies in Venezuela as well, for example, in the ID system of its people and the oil rigs. And talk to us more about the CCP's role in all of this. And is the U.S. in a way trying to counter the CCP's influence through countering, for example, threats from Venezuela?
Correct. The CCP, the PRC actively are involved within the Western Hemisphere because they see that as a way of making sure the United States is spending resources, time, and energy in politics in shoring up our own backyard. Obviously, also access to the minerals, oil, and resources that are rich within Latin America is something that's a very big interest to Beijing. And then we know that the PRC and the CCP consistently engage in corrupt business practices and undermine the leadership of many of these countries by paying bribes and getting sweetheart deals that push out American business interests and even the local folks from being able to benefit from what's in their country. So it's certainly in China's best interest to make sure that we're distracted, that we're focused on issues within our own hemisphere, so that they can continue to do the repressive things that they do in other places. In regards to the technology that they provide Venezuela, there's nothing new there. The Chinese have done that in a number of other places, providing military support, technologies that allow them to surveil and to be repressive, against people within their countries. So this is just something simply that they do right out of their playbook.
So speaking of China's tactic, or like you said, long-term practice of using technology to export its repression here, there's two lawmakers right now who are urging the Supreme Court in the U.S. to allow a lawsuit to proceed against a U.S. tech company, Cisco. It is accused of enabling the CCP's brutal persecution of the spiritual practice called Falun Gong, which is persecuted inside China. The AP reports, quote, American tech companies to a large degree designed and built China's surveillance state. So talk to us here about what the Supreme Court is considering here and the ultimate implications of this case, as it's almost the other way around. U.S. companies intentionally or unintentionally assisting with the CCP's regime's repression.
Correct. I mean, I would make the distinction, of course, that this is a U.S. company, not the U.S. government, right? And since we do have rule of law in our country, there are steps we can take to make sure that certain technologies aren't legally exported out of our country. Look, I think this case highlights a very critical question about whether American technology is helping or helped the Chinese communist regime, carry out human rights abuses against Falun Gong and other, free democratic movements, right? The allegation is that Cisco's networking systems were adapted by the Chinese authorities for mass surveillance, something that the company, just to be clear, the company does deny. Regardless of the lawsuit's outcome, I think it shines light on how U.S. tech firms face a real moral and strategic, a real moral problem and strategic risks when operating inside authoritarian systems. If you're operating within China, if you're operating within Russia or other maligned countries, this is the kinds of things that you're going to wind up getting yourself into in some way or another if you're not extremely careful. This serves as, I think, as a reminder that American innovation should never ever enable oppression abroad, and we need to take active steps to make sure that doesn't occur.
A risk of aiding and malign persecution and activities by regimes like China. Indeed, a very serious consideration for American businesses, as we are discussing everything, including chip exports as well, in today's time and day. Thank you so much, Rick, for your insights today. Appreciate it.